All right, perhaps one of the biggest developments in the NASCAR charter discussions has happened. A lawsuit or a antitrust suit has been filed against the National Association of Stock Car Racing from 23XI and Front Row Motorsports. This is definitely the biggest step in, I would say, I don't want to say the wrong direction because I want to make it sound like that the teams are at fault here when they're definitely not the only person of bad here, but definitely a step in the wrong direction for the sport. It's a lot of the information in this lawsuit. I read through this entire lawsuit earlier today. A lot of interesting information in here, a lot of stuff, and you can tell the way they're going to attack this is it's really interesting. Um, People are asking what they want to get out of this, what their goal is. That's the one thing I don't really know. The best way I can describe it is they want to permanently transform how the sport functions. And I'll be honest with you, it goes beyond the sorry, my throat's a little not clear. It goes beyond the charter agreement and just getting more money. It goes, how they make the parts of the cars, how they make the cars, how they make the rules, how they officiate the rules, how the tracks are held. And we'll go over that as we go on here. I got some notes of some points that they make here, so we'll go through it here. I'm going to try and make this as concise as possible while also trying to just make this more of a stream of consciousness. So let's scroll through here. Let's go here. This opening statement, I've seen this everywhere, but I'll read it here. This is a case about the unlawful monopolization of premier stock car racing by the France family in order to enrich themselves at the expense of premier stock car racing teams that the fans come out to see and that sponsors and broadcasters value. The France family has realized monopoly profits through its ownership and control over the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing, which has exploited its economic power as a sole premier stock car racing organization in the United States. NASCAR races are the number one motorsport events in the United States, with no other motorsport series coming close in broadcast ratings. Live gate attendance, right fees, and or corporate sponsorship revenue. That's a little bit of exaggeration, but we'll continue. The dominant position has not been created by the superior product or skill of NASCAR's owners. It is the product of the anti-competitive and exclusionary practices that NASCAR has employed to protect its premier racing series, known as the Cup Series. From time from having time to compete with any other premier stock car racing series, the France family has used NASCAR to acquire and maintain a monopoly position over premier stock car racing teams through, among other anti-competitive actions. And then they talk about the next gen car here. You can read this for yourself. It's public. You can read everything here. I suggest you, if you really are interested in what's this might happen with, I suggest reading this. It's not super long. It says 45 pages. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in here. We'll move on to my next point here, which is note 18. This is a lot about stuff we already kind of know. Note number 18 here, which is the big thing on how they negotiated. So if anyone remembers, early in September for the playoffs, they negotiated the charter agreement and everyone signed. And then it was kind of like, oh, it's over. Except Front Row and 23XI didn't sign. What was interesting about that is that a lot of the teams weren't very happy with it. And this right here, I'll read it. The individual negotiations with the racing teams were completely one-sided, as NASCAR refused to budge from any of their core negotiating demands. Then, with little warning, NASCAR sent a final take-it-or-leave-it version of the 2025 charter agreement to the teams at approximately 5 p.m. on September 6, 2024. If we look at September 6, 2024, that was that Friday. So this is 5 p.m. Friday, 6 p.m. deadline, they say. Told teams they had 6 p.m. deadline to sign a more than 100-page agreement or risk not having a charter for 2025. After initial outrage from the teams, Jim France and other members of NASCAR senior leadership started calling the teams to tell them that they would extend the signing deadline to midnight, but would eliminate the charter system altogether for 2025 and beyond if a substantial number of teams did not sign by that deadline. The teams knew that fielding a NASCAR car had become so expensive that it would not be economically economically devastating. Geez, I'm sorry. For most of them to compete without the stability provided by the charter system, and they would suffer a complete loss of their enterprise values if the charter system was discontinued. First off, A lot of information there. If that is all true, that is terrible. I mean, that is horrendous by the officiating body. Again, I don't know if this is true. This is all this says in the lawsuit. Again, you can read this on the internet. It's available anywhere. I'll put a link in the description to it for heck's sake. But that is bad. I mean, I'm not a legal expert, so I'm not going to advise on if there's anything illegal about that. But my common sense screams that there's something definitely not right about randomly saying, hey, we're not going to agree with you, or we're going to just throw away all contract negotiations if you don't sign by this date, by this time, even though we said that we can negotiate up till December 31st, 2024. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess they have the position to do that, but that's don't like it. Let's see what else is we got here. Yeah, faced with a take it to leave it offer and no company competing opportunity for premier stock car racing in the United States, most teams concluded that they had to sign. One team described it as being coerced. Another team said it was under duress. A third team said it was NASCAR, quote, putting a gun to our heads, and we had to sign. A fourth described NASCAR's tactics as that of a communist regime. None of these teams would permit their identities to be publicly revealed. I think the last one there, the communist regime, I think that was a statement from Childress. Maybe that was anonymous. I don't know. That might have been a rumor or joke or whatever. But I feel like a couple of those were actually released who said those. So we'll move forward here on to some other points. This one, 21 actually. To further protect NASCAR's monopoly power. Oh, they actually spelled that wrong. The 2025 charter agreement expanded the scope of the non-compete provision in the 2016 charter agreement. While teams used to be prohibited from participating in any professional stock car racing other than NASCAR, teams of the 2025 charter agreement are now prohibited from participating in any, quote, automobile or truck racing series not sanctioned by NASCAR. So even if a team could figure out how to transfer its stock car racing enterprise to another kind of automobile racing, it is now contractually prohibited from doing so by the terms of the 2025 charter agreement. That's really bad too. Because this brings up so many questions. First off, what the hell does that even mean, automobile or truck racing series? Does that apply to Justin Marks running his MotoGP team? I don't know. That's an automotive racing series. I guess it's not an automobile, but it's still a racing series, competing racing series. What does that mean for Roger Penske, who's running open wheel? That's an automobile, technically speaking. I mean, are they going to expect him, if he wants to stay in NASCAR, to close his automobile team? I mean, for the love of God, he owns IndyCar. He owns the consistently second largest motorsports body in the country, with the only race and event that is bigger than anything NASCAR does. He basically owns the Indianapolis 500. And then, what does this mean for Hendrick Motorsports trying to get Kyle Larson into the 2025 Indy 500? Does that mean they can't do that? I know Joe Gibbs also has a nitrocross team, I believe, right? There's varying things that other teams are involved in where it's like, where does the limit stop? And does that mean now starting next year you can't run in any of those things? And I mean, then why would Roger Penske sign this unless he was either planning on selling or there's some grandfathered clause in? I just don't know. I don't, and also for NASCAR, I don't get that. I don't understand. Immediately, I just thought about this. I don't think Dale Jr. could even go in the NASCAR. He owns a Cars team, I'm fairly certain. He owns Cars, the series, which is an automobile racing series. Arguably, it's probably the best head-to-head competitor against NASCAR now, because it's probably the biggest short track series outside of anything NASCAR doesn't own. Anyway, continuing on here, we'll move on to my next point, or next thing I wrote down, which be all the way down to point 54. Here we go. Since 2018, NASCAR has hosted and organized at least 2 Cup Series stock car competitions each year at Charlotte Motor Speedway in Charlotte, North Carolina. In this district, the Coca-Cola 600 Air Memorial Day weekend in May since 1960, and the Bank of America Roval 400 since 2018. I mean, I don't know why they didn't include the previous. They've run two races there forever. Also, I don't know why they're making this point, but this is what we'll explain here. NASCAR has also hosted the All Star race in this district in both 2023 and 2024. Since 2009, NASCAR has maintained corporate offices in this district in Charlotte, North Carolina. Defendant Jim France regularly transacts business in the state of North Carolina and in this district. He has directed, controlled, or ratified each of the anti-competitive actions taken by defendant NASCAR in this district. Venue is proper because defendant resides are found. I think this is in regards to saying that they can file it in this area. But that whole statement right there, bringing that up, is something I think we should be very concerned about. They basically are bringing up the fact that he conducts business there, primarily with I assume would be SMI, which is Marcus Smith, which owns all the other tracks, which pretty much owns the only asset NASCAR has outside of is the only other thing that owns an asset outside of them, and they have got a very very close relationship now. SMI and NASCAR has almost think I think there was even talks. I don't confirm this because I don't remember if this was true or not. If this was just a rumor or if I'm making this up, but that they were going to merge, which adds to the monopoly because then NASCAR would literally own every big track in America. Man, if they go after this, the big thing I think that's going to happen with this, and I think there was already talks of this happening earlier on before this lawsuit came out, or this antitrust suit. They're going to bust up the tracks. I think ISC is going to be blown apart, and I think SMI might be blown apart. The monopolization of owning racetracks, which we really haven't even acknowledged, is probably going to go down the tubes very, very soon. Which I don't know if that's good. I think that might be the best thing that comes out of this right now is that they get rid of the tracks monopolizing themselves. You don't want to have the same person owning every track. A lot of vehicles just went by. You don't want to have. The reason why is because, again, they can have vast control over it. You don't have as many other assets, as many other sanctioning bodies and promoters doing the same thing. That's the only thing I could see. We all up until the last 20 years, we've had different tracks be owned independently, and it worked very, very well. A big thing, by the way, is and this is where I think they could really get them, is that NASCAR is not a league; it's a sanctioning body, and the fact that they bought up everything in the market is a great argument for their monopoly. The NFL doesn't get in trouble with this because whilst there is one NFL and there's not really many competitors besides the UFL, so on and so forth, right? The NFL can get away from it even if the UFL didn't exist because they have the multiple teams, all different businesses, so on and so forth, different investments. The cities are with the buildings as well. They do have some issues, I think, with antitrust stuff, though, but it's definitely not as bad as what NASCAR can get pegged here for with owning the tracks. I'll continue, though, with point number 57, I think, right here. The 2016 charter agreement between the parties contained a limited arbitration provision for claims arising under the connection with the 2016 charter agreement. The provision is inapplicable in this plaintiff's claims arise that the defendant's unlawful anti-competitive scheme to acquire and maintain monopoly power through exclusionary actions and unreasonable restraints or trade. Yeah, okay. That wasn't anything. So here is the factual allegations here, and this is where I thought this got interesting. Ever since its founding in 1948 by Bill France Sr., NASCAR has been a private company controlled by the France family racing dynasty, which ESPN called the most powerful lineage in American sports. While other professional sports organizations have evolved, the France family operates like a closed-door shop, wheeling and dealing its monopoly power in smoke-filled back rooms. I don't know if they're smoke-filled anymore. Winston's been out for at least 20 years now. I'm joking. The France family has long been determined to protect its monopoly from from having to compete with any other racing organization. When Lee Petty's when Lee Petty, Richard Petty's father, like how they clarified who Lee Petty was. I mean, it makes sense. Not a lot of people know who Lee Petty is anymore. Competed in a non-NASCAR race in 1950. Big Bill France Sr. responded by stripping him of all of his earned points in the NASCAR standings. Yes, and that's how Bill Rexford won the title. Lee Petty actually would have won that championship, but he ran, I believe, it was what ARCA was before ARCA was actually formed. Or no, I think it might have been the series that Bruton Smith was trying to get off the ground way back then that died in like 1951. Regardless, that's a really interesting point. That's almost 75 years ago, but they're building a history here and move forward. France family has equally been determined to prevent its drivers or teams from asserting their economic rights. In 1961, the Teamsters attempted to unionize NASCAR drivers. Bill France Sr. responded by decreeing no known Teamster can compete in a NASCAR race. That is true. And I'll use a pistol to enforce it. That is a everyone knows that story. When NASCAR veteran drivers saw the track conditions for the first running of the Talladega 500 in 1969 were unsafe, with the track tearing up tires and cars crashing, Bill France Jr. tried to shame the veteran drivers in driving by first pretending to drive a demonstration lap to show the track was safe, which he accomplished only by driving well below actual race speeds, and then by telling drivers, if you're scared, go home. That dismissive treatment earned him a punch in the face from Lee Roy Yarborough, who was in the midst of his best season, the NASCAR's top driver that year. He actually pulled off the Triple Crown that year. He won the Daytona 500, the Southern 500, and the Coke 600. Only guy to do that up until Jeff Gordon did that in the same year in 1997. Anyway, undeterred, Bill France Sr. held the race anyway, mostly with replacement drivers who would never be heard from in NASCAR again. That's not completely true. Richard Childress was in that race. He famously got his career pretty much started and kicked off in that race running that because no one else ran it. Richard Brickhouse actually had his son be a spotter in the sport for a really long period of time. I know that's not a great argument, but there was quite a few drivers that were back markers that ran that race and did pretty well and had a pretty good career a little while afterwards. And to the last point here, when Bill France became the CEO of NASCAR in 1972, he told reporters they could describe NASCAR as a, quote, dictatorship, as long as they qualified that dictatorship as benign. Now, the only thing that I would argue against this whole thing of the Francis having absolute power, yes, those things that Bill France Sr. did were not great. Those were bad times. But the reason why we've never seen the drivers unionize in the sport for 50 plus years is because Bill France Jr., when he ran the sport, well, actually, back up. First off, there's a lot of incentive for the drivers to still run as salaried contractual workers. There's enough to where, because they get a lot more freedom of what they want to do and what they can say. When Bill France Jr. took over, they get those benefits, and on top of that, Bill France Jr. Bill France Jr. was created an atmosphere where that was borderline never necessary. You could hear multiple people, he would be in the garage all the time with the drivers. There's countless stories of him leading while like a dictator, so he got the final say in everything, which was true. He always did it with the mind of, I understand I have a dictatorship, but just as much as I have this power, the power can be taken away from me if I run this into the ground. Right? He had a vision. He was a good leader. He was a good leader with absolute power. And as you can see here, the next bad point about their leadership goes all the way through his tenure to when Brian France takes over and gets arrested for DUI and steps out of NASCAR in 2019. I won't say anything about him for the fear of getting a lawsuit myself. Moving on to the 78th point, and this will be the last one we really talk about. This video is already almost 20 minutes. After imposing the anti-competitive terms for the Charter Agreement in 2016, NASCAR and the France family continue to engage in exclusionary and anti-competitive acts to preserve and maintain NASCAR's monopoly power over premier stock car racing in the United States. NASCAR maintains its monopoly power by purchasing large cache of racetracks that it uses to protect its market position and by forcing anti-competitive exclusionary provisions on the tracks and does not own. A premier stock car racing series must be that a series of races across the United States featuring top tier stock car racing teams. Any new competitor to NASCAR in this market would likely need to host a minimum of 18 to 20 races each year. I would agree with that. For a strong competitor to emerge, 24 to 28 races a year would likely need to be run each year. To be successful, a 28 race season would also likely require races to be run at least two super speedway tracks, six intermediate tracks, and 12 short tracks, and a handful of road course tracks. Again, I would agree with that. I think that would be to have a significant competitor. Yeah. Teams would also need a national presence, hosting races across the country at premier racetracks capable of hosting high-end competitions. Not just any racetrack is capable of hosting stock car racing events that are good enough to compete with the NASCAR Cup Series. A track must be able to put on a high-quality event for both television and in-person fans, and have an opportunity to turn a profit. This means having a per-day capacity of at least 25,000 spectators. That is true. I agree with all this right now in order to create an equal competitor. And meeting top-level requirements regarding safety, infrastructure, track surface, and side-by-side racing capability. Some of those tracks we run right now don't have that capability, but that's not because of the track. Anyway, promotional pedigree, which impacts a track's ability to pack the stands and entertain the fans. Operational and mechanical facilities, insurance, and guest service capabilities for fans, sponsors, and other strategic partners. Plus the experience and staffing capabilities to successfully hold such an event. There are a limited number of such racetracks in the United States, and so whoever controls those racetracks controls the ability of any other racing series to compete with NASCAR. And I went over it in here, but they talk about how they bought ARCA, and that was another step into them becoming a monopoly. It's been over 20 minutes, so I'm going to finish this up here. This is going to be really interesting over the next few months. If you're a fan of the sport, I would keep an eye on this. I know a lot of people, they hate talking about the charter agreement. I understand. I find it interesting because it's a lot about the future of the sport. If you're not interested in this stuff, I completely get it. This is a lot of legal jargon. This is a lot of stuff that just isn't fun. But at the same time, when you read some of this stuff, I don't agree with everything that Denny Hamlin, or more like Michael Jordan, and this suit wants to bring about. I don't like the idea of charters. I think charters have always been a bad thing for the sport. I would like them removed permanently. But I also understand this argument with the way they built the sport up now, you have to have charters. I don't like the idea of them leaning into the idea of trying to make this into a league like the NFL and the NBA, because they want to say that they should be able to have teams and money, teams and infrastructure based off of just running in races and not having to get sponsorship. I understand that, and there was an argument in here which I disagreed with, that I can't remember where it was, but that everybody who's ever come into the sport has never made any money. That's not true. There's a lot of drivers and a lot of owners and a lot of teams where, yeah, they might have bellied up and had to leave because they quit, but made a lot of money in this sport. Not as much now, obviously, but, regardless, nonetheless. Anyway, that'll do it for this video. Thank you if you made it through the end of this, thank you. This has been a crazy day in stock car racing. It's the first time this probably ever happened. It's historic, sadly. And it's going to be interesting. See people in the future.